Hi everybody, it's Annette from The Art of Intuition, and today we're going to talk about counting our chickens before they hatch, which is a very old, actually human phrase. And you're going to find that a lot of human phrases, human, I can't even, the catchphrase, I can't think of what the common term is for those little acronyms or whatever. It's not even an acronym, but you know where I'm going with it, are kind of encoded with other information. And there was a phrase that we all knew, don't count your chickens before they hatch. In other words, you don't plan on something before you have it. So, what does that really mean? And I was on my monthly consciousness call, and we were talking about this. So, I really want to kind of delve into it a little more because when I was listening to them talk about it, the phrase don't count their chickens before they hatch kept coming to mind. So, I was like, that's the video I want to do. But this was something that Lisa Transcendence Brown was talking about. So if anyone does not follow her work, I highly recommend her work. It's amazing work. But we were talking about timelines and how they can never settle in. And we talk a lot about new timelines coming in and how excited we get about them. You usually because we've been waiting on them a long time. And one thing you're going to find is when you get into your higher states of consciousness, you are more plugged into different futures. And you see a lot of them in the beginning when you're sleeping, because that's when your vibration's higher. You're always going to be higher when you're sleeping, right? But in the beginning, and when you're in your awakening, your pre-ascension, your ascension, all those different times, those different spaces you're in, different parts of the process, what you're going to find is that you're going to be able to anchor in, see other realities. I had a friend that used to call them teeing up other realities, so you can then bring them in. And we've talked a lot about seeing something when you're sleeping. And I usually use the example, if you want to write a book and all of a sudden you dream that you are at a book signing and you're signing your books and you want to anchor in that reality. You might not have put one word on paper yet, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that you've teed it up, you've seen it, which means the vibration of that reality is not that far off from the vibration your body's setting in. Now remember, that reality can't come forth until your body's vibration sets at that. That is why you can't remember your dreams a lot of the times, because the vibration is too far off. So when you wake up, your vibration is going to get lower in a sense. You're not going to be as high because you're now constrained by the body and the programming of the body, the human programming in the body, the density of the body. So you won't be able to reach as high. So that's why we forget, and you'll see that a lot. We say, oh, I remembered it right and woke up and then I forgot it. I'll also say, right, if you dream something right before you wake up, right before you go to sleep, normally for me, that's a sign it's coming in faster, because it's a very incremental change in your vibration in that moment, So now what is faster? We are the separation across time and space, human is. So faster to us could be, 2 years. It could be 2 months. It depends on what you're doing to anchor it in. So don't get too hung up on the time frames, but I did want to kind of throw that out there, that sometimes when that happens, it's closer than you think it might be. And other times I'll dream of things and it could take 2.5 years for it actually to show up. A lot of times 2.5 years is kind of the minimum when I would dream something and kind of tee it up, because it can take that long. And that's if you're doing everything you see to do and you are giving it everything you got. You're not distracted by other human third dimensional consciousness things. You're giving it everything you have. You see what you're supposed to do. You get up every day and do it. And a lot of times what you're doing might not be a linear thing. You might see you're supposed to take a trip to England before you write that book, before you even start writing that book, because you have to have some type of activation that's going to be in England, because everywhere we go, we get activated and then come back and start writing. So a lot of the things you're going to feel to do and see to do, and I mean see from here, not here, is going to lead you to that reality and anchoring it in. But what we'll do, which a lot of us have done in our human consciousness, and I will also say I've done it when I'm trying to anchor in higher consciousness realities I've seen, and I never really understood what I was doing or why some things would never come in. They would start to come in and then they'd stop. And this is what we were talking about on the call. When we start talking about stuff that's not here, let's say you want, you wanted to move to this place and you got a space, right? But you haven't signed the lease, or it wasn't all 100%. You weren't actually in the space yet, because until you're actually in the space, the reality can't anchor in. Until you actually have the job, the reality cannot anchor in. Until you actually have, let's say the book signing, until you have the contract in your hand, or until you have the publisher, until it's published, it's not anchored in yet. It's still not physically here. It can still get disrupted. Okay, so what disrupts it is when we start talking about having it, because that is, in a sense, a very ego-driven thing to do, right? We start talking about, oh, I wanted to go do this. I wanted to, I don't know, be a sports broadcaster, and I got this opportunity to do that, and that's what I really want to do, and it feels so aligned for me to do that, whatever it is for you. And maybe you got an offer, or maybe you look like you were going to get something, and you start talking about it, and then it doesn't come through. And sometimes it can look like it's right there and it's going to come through in the minute you start talking about it, because the frequency you're giving off is a ego frequency. It is a third dimensional frequency. It's a third dimensional consciousness frequency, and it disrupts the frequency of what you're trying to bring in. So it will kind of cause the whole thing to crumble. So this is definitely something I'm going to watch for. Because I have had a lot of things that look like they were so close, and then the minute I start talking about them, I felt like they never would come in. I'm like, why is that happening? And then I was starting to put two and two together. You don't count the chickens before they hatch. You don't even talk about the chickens before they hatch. You don't want to disrupt it. And just remember, until it's here, it's not anchored. And you actually have to be there for probably a few days. I'm going to say probably, but until you can feel it is secure and anchored in. Like, you have the signed contract in your hand, you have the books published in your hand, you have, you're actually physically in the new space and you've been there for 3 or 4 days. It's not anchored in yet. It's still coming in. It's still kind of fitting together. And we saw this happen in our human realities. And that's where the phrase comes from, don't count on it till it's there. But we weren't able to see what was going on, right? And then all of a sudden you get the insight to be able to see it. And a lot of people will say, how come I couldn't see it? You didn't have the consciousness to see it. You didn't have remembrance of how things really work to see, why is that a saying? Why does it work that way? How come when I would see it and talk about something, or something looked like it was going to happen, the minute I talked about it, it stopped the whole thing? That's the reason. It's a frequency match. It no longer matches where you're going, in a sense, right? So the whole thing will sort of fall apart. So just be aware of that, and be aware when you start putting out something that's discordant frequency to what you're trying to anchor in. And I know sometimes that can be challenging because we get so excited when some of these realities start coming in because we've waited so long for them. I will say, like, we're never surprised anymore in higher consciousness realities, because everything we see coming, like I see everything coming normally years in advance. So when it gets here, I'm like, holy crap, I thought you'd never get here. Where have you been? I've been waiting forever, even though we technically don't wait, but that's kind of what it feels like sometimes. It's like, where is that reality? I've worked so hard to get it here and it's just not here yet. So look at the new insights you have into realities. So I want to pivot this a little bit to this, because in our human consciousness, we were so busy with so much garbage in our life and so many external influence and so much. Our brain frequency is different. Our brain waves are at a different frequency. So we can't start to process the energetic information that's coming in. Even though we're processing it unconsciously, we're not processing it consciously. When we process it consciously, that's where the insights come in at. You get to the consciousness where that information is, but you can't get to that consciousness unless you set in higher consciousness. You anchor in, you start anchoring in these realities, you work toward them. You raise your body vibration to get to the frequency where that information is. That is kind of the sweet spots. When you've been looking at something, you didn't understand what's going on. How come I get so close and some things aren't happening? What's going on here? And you don't understand. And you don't remember yet. Maybe that's a better way to say it. We don't remember. We forgot how it all worked. And then all of a sudden things become clearer and you start to understand. Normally we get the information when we're not looking for the information, because we take all the resistance out of having to know it. Having to know it is kind of an ego frequency, right? I have to know it. Your ego has to know it. Your soul already knows it. the higher aspects of you already know it. You know, your soul wants to, your ego wants to know it. So already it's discordant to where the information is. So the minute you stop trying to know it and stop trying to understand it, that's when all of a sudden the insights come in, where you're able to kind of anchor into it a little bit. You can feel into it because you're opening yourself up. You're clearing out your field to be able to actually read the energetic field. You don't have all the physical stuff in your field anymore. And we start pulling out of third dimensional realities, the human realities in a sense, the realities driven and created by our ego consciousness. We have so much more. We actually activate the neural pathways so they kind of reprogram in a sense where they're picking up more stuff. You know, there is that, I think I've talked about this lots of times, you know, like 90% of our DNA is junk DNA, is what human science will tell you. Where that 90% is actually very important. It's just not active in a human body. It gets activated when you start unanchoring from human experiences in a sense. When you start unanchoring from that consciousness, that's when that DNA comes online. That's when higher consciousness comes online. Your brain gets rewired. Consciousness will affect your environment, right? And that your environment is your body. So it does kind of start to reprogram and rework the body. And there's a lot of body stuff that happens. So when we talk about raising our body vibration to get to that reality, that's what we're doing. Our body, that's why it can take years sometimes to get to a reality we saw in our dreams, because we are doing so much work. And that's if you're giving it everything you got. So it can feel like a slog sometimes. So don't get too discouraged if it has felt like a slog, because that's kind of normal. Sometimes it will feel that way because our ego gets impatient, but that's why. Our body has to set in that reality so it can come in around us. And it starts to come in pieces, and it's going to all kind of solidify together. So if we see the pieces start to fit together and we start putting out a discordant frequency, it kind of blows the pieces up again. And we're going to have to work through that distortion before it can then come in again. It might be another year or so before something comes in again. And it might not be the exact same way. So just keep that in mind. So no counting our chickens, and keep practicing the art of intuition.